Good evening to those who are just joining us. It's funny to say evening right now. I can see the sun reflecting off the window behind me, but it is evening nonetheless. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you all. I see more participants are coming in even as I'm talking. So we're going to do about a 5-minute pause, and then we'll get started with the actual presentation around 6:05. But thank you all for joining this evening. Good evening to the folks who are just starting to join us. Why don't we go ahead and just put our welcome presentation on so everyone knows they're in the right spot. But I hope those of you who are joining now are here for tonight's network geothermal presentation. We're glad to have you. We'll be starting right around 6:05, so just a couple more minutes, bear with us. All right. Hello, everyone. My clock says 6:05, which I think is the time for us to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming here this sunny late afternoon / early spring evening. I'm glad to have you here. My name is Garrett Anderson. I'm with the Office of Sustainability for the City of Somerville. I have a couple of colleagues with me, Naomi and Shannon, who both work in OSE along with me. as well as some of the folks from our consulting team who worked on this study and produced a lot of the content here that we're going to discuss this evening. I have Alex and Jason from Buro Happold and Clara and Robert from Brightcore. And they'll be available to answer questions and as well as talk about some of these materials. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, just before we do get started, in case you didn't catch the note, this meeting is being recorded. And so we will be posting it in a couple of days after we've processed it, and we'll be putting it on the City of Somerville website for folks who aren't able to join this evening to be able to review on their own time. So, but once again, yeah, thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and get into the agenda on the next slide. Yes, so the purpose of this meeting is to talk about network geothermal, which is technology we've been exploring as a key element of Somerville's larger climate forward decarbonization goals. And also to report back for some of you who may have come to an earlier presentation where we talked about the feasibility studies that were underway. This meeting will be presenting some of the results of that feasibility study and previewing the information that will be in the report that we'll be posting online in the next couple of weeks. And then we also, before we all leave this evening, and we will have plenty of time for questions and answers after our presentation, we want to give some concrete steps that folks like yourselves can take to stay engaged on this topic and on our climate forward goals generally. So yeah, so as I was saying, the agenda, we're going to start a little bit about some background of climate forward and the context for network geothermal. Then we'll do a kind of a 101, maybe 201 type presentation about network geothermal and the results of some of the studies that we've been doing here in the City of Somerville. And we'll have plenty of time for question and answer afterwards. So as we go along to the presentation, think of, save your questions, and we'll have time for folks to chime in either orally or in the chat. So a couple of Zoom logistics, maybe Naomi will just go through it for a moment.
Absolutely. So because we're in a webinar format, you guys don't have access to chat, but we will have time at the end for Q&A. And when that happens, you can use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to raise your hand, and I will unmute you and you can ask your question. And hopefully we'll have time for everyone's question. And if not, I'll put an email in the chat. You can email at the end as well if we aren't not able to get to you. But hold your questions for the presentation, and we'll have a lot of time at the end to talk about them. So thank you all.
Great, thanks, Naomi. And I think before we get started, let's just take a moment to do a quick poll. We wanted to hear a little bit about how you might have heard about this presentation and your living situation here in the City of Somerville, renter, homeowner, landlord, otherwise, and also just generally, we're kind of interested in how familiar you are with network geothermal. So if folks want to go ahead and start clicking away, we can see those results, I think, in real time. Naomi, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the poll results. Maybe that's something you're working on right as I'm saying it. Oh, there they are. Wonderful. So we see a few responses coming in. Oh, at least one person out there got one of our mailers. So glad to hear about that. We're trying to get the word out in the specific neighborhoods that we were studying. So glad at least a few folks got that in the mail, and probably a lot of other folks saw the Sustainaville newsletter or the citywide newsletters or some of the flyers that we put up. So glad to have you all here. Looks like we have most of the answers in. So and it looks like we have a good mix of folks who are very familiar and folks who are not very familiar at all. So not to worry. We're going to start at the beginning in the presentation, and just a preview. For anyone who was at the previous webinars, we are going to talk generally about geothermal technology. So some of it might be a repeat for you, but we are also going to talk about the results of the study itself. So be a mix of some old content and some new content. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into where network geothermal is. This is a technology and a system and a network that we're interested in the context of the many things that the city of Somerville is pursuing for its climate forward agenda. And if there's one thing I can leave you with from this meeting is do go to somervillema.gov/climate forward. You can read the plan there. You'll see it has 77 action items in it that are along different action areas, such as buildings and energy, which is kind of what this is focused on, as well as transportation, our parks and open spaces, city operations, as well as the basic community health and resiliency, which is such a key part of climate change. I think if we go on to the next slide, we all know climate change has many impacts: warmer summers, more variable weather, higher highs, lower lows, more precipitation, and all of those things impact public health. Heat waves are a public health menace. And I don't want to belabor, but we all know climate change is happening right now. We already see the effects here in Somerville, and we also are projecting out and planning for the effects of it. So what you see in front of you are a couple of maps from some of recent resiliency studies that we've completed that show coastal flooding impacts into the city of Somerville from the Mystic River and from the Boston Harbor. So these are real things that are happening and things that we are taking into consideration for our future planning efforts as we think about infrastructure and new systems and new ways of delivering services to the residents of Somerville. Let's go ahead. So this study is in the context of a larger sort of developing world of network geothermal in Massachusetts that is in many ways being led by the organization HEAT. And another thing I could invite you to do is to check out heat.org/gas to geotransition. That website has a lot of information about the technology and its context here in Massachusetts. It has a lot of information about the pilot projects that are happening in Massachusetts that we'll reference here this evening. And it also has a place where you as a resident can register your interest in the gas to geo transition. You'll see the map in front of you has some of those dots. Those are your neighbors who have expressed interest in the past. So if that is something you're continued to be interested in, please do check out that website and sign up for further information from them and register your interest. This is a evolving space, as we say, and so something that Somerville wants to continue to be on the forefront of. I also should say this particular study was funded through a grant provided by HEAT, their Kickstart grant, and we were one of a dozen odd communities in Massachusetts that utilized that grant resource. I think it was 14 communities, in fact, that perform feasibility studies like this for network geothermal in their community. So you'll see Somerville in there as part of that portfolio of studies and projects that we're all hoping to develop. And with that, I think we should move into what is piloting the gas to geo transition, and I will hand it off to Alex from Buro Happold.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Good evening, everyone. It's light out, which is wild given we were just talking a few months ago in the darkness. But excited to talk about some of the work we've been doing over the last few months, looking at the viability for network geothermal here in Somerville. So Naomi, I think if you're controlling the slides, we'll step forward one slide. And so first, I kind of want to establish why we're here talking about this at all. And so as Garrett spoke about just now, fundamentally, we're really here to help meet some of the climate goals that Somerville has put into place. And we know that building energy use makes up the vast majority of the city's annual emissions. And so when we start to take this number of all the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the building sector and we unpack it by the fuel mix making up a lot of that energy consumption at the building scale, we find that it's largely made up by natural gas and fuel oil, combustible sources of energy. And so what we want to do is start to shift this amount of gas and oil over to electricity. And we want to also be able to build upon and leverage the great work the city is already doing right now to supply the city with clean energy through their community choice electricity program. And so that's really why we're here, to electrify especially the heating sector here in Somerville. And Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I want to talk about why it's not as easy of a problem to address as you may think. Um, so to kind of show what this means, the plot on the right side of your screen essentially is showing the typical electricity demand for a typical building here in Somerville, where the peak electrical demand in the summertime, that blue line on your screen, is higher than the winter electricity demand, that red line you're seeing below it, because we use so much natural gas here in Somerville for our heating loads. Our electricity grid here in Somerville is engineered and it's sized to meet that blue number, that peak cooling number in the summertime. And so let's say we decided to give everyone an air source heat pump, which is the predominant electrified heating system on the market today, as a way to electrify all of the heating in their homes and their businesses. Well, because Somerville is a largely heating dominant climate, the peak heating number that you see in red on your screen will start to rise above that blue number. And so then at that point, our electricity grid will start to struggle to meet the loads in the wintertime needed to heat our buildings on those cold winter days. And so we really need some sort of technology that's efficient enough to help keep that from happening over the future. And so if we step forward a slide, Naomi, thank you. There is a solution to this problem, and it is called network geothermal. Network geothermal, as Garrett mentioned earlier, is an emerging technology here in Massachusetts. Essentially, what it does is it takes a typical ground source heat pump system that you may have heard about before, that exchanges heating and cooling energy with the ground, and essentially it scales it to encompass an entire neighborhood of buildings. Some of the really great things about these particular systems is that they can utilize their pipe networks as a thermal storage system, and they can capture wasted heat from manufacturing or other industrial facilities across a neighborhood to help heat other buildings along it. And as we know, Somerville is an incredibly dense city, but that's actually where this technology really starts to thrive. We can deliver more heating and cooling with less pipework in the ground, which makes it a more cost efficient and effective system capable of providing non-combustible energy to our buildings for heating and cooling throughout the year. And so if we step forward one slide, I want to talk about what this means from a bit more of a granular perspective. So I'm going to talk through all the components of what makes up network geothermal. And so the first thing that we do is we drill a series of boreholes into the ground. These are holes a few inches wide in diameter and usually about 500 feet deep or so. And in those holes, we will install pipes. And those pipes are filled with a mix of water and glycol, essentially an antifreeze solution. And it allows those pipes to exchange heating and cooling with the ground and subsequently produce about 55-degree temperature fluid. That fluid, which is located in those pipes we installed, then move throughout the neighborhood that network geothermal is installed in, similar to any other gas or water utility delivering gas or water to your buildings. At the building level, we then have a heat pump located in your home or your business that takes that 55-degree fluid, and depending on the time of year and if you want to heat or cool your home, we'll take that temperature and we will shift it up to the temperature you need to heat or cool your space throughout the year. And lastly, how do you actually pay for this? Well, there are a lot of different ways that these systems can bill you that we've been seeing pop up across the country, whether it's through a monthly subscription fee or a metered utility charge like you currently pay for your gas or electricity usage on a month-by-month basis. Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I want to talk a little bit about how these systems, sorry, get implemented at all. There are two key components that we need to install a network geothermal system. The first is the centralized kind of community level infrastructure needed to exchange and deliver that heating and cooling energy to all of the buildings on the network. So like I said earlier, first we need to drill boreholes into the ground, those 500-foot deep holes into the ground. And we need to lay pipe work in the streets, similar to any other utility that currently operates in Somerville, in order to deliver that geothermal energy to your home or your business. And I do want to make sure that we are not minimizing the scale of work involved in this type of a project, as it is fundamentally a large infrastructure project. But there are measures that we can put in place to minimize noise and any other kind of surrounding implications to the neighborhood receiving this type of a system. The other key component of this installation, which has a bit more of a direct impact on all of you here on the call tonight, are the retrofits that need to happen to the homes or businesses needed to make them compatible with a network geothermal system. The extent and the complexity of these retrofits will vary a lot depending on your home, but they'll typically involve installing ducting if you don't already have it, electrifying or upgrading your existing electrical panel, and weatherizing your home, whether it's through new windows, adding insulation, improving the air sealing of your home. And a lot of these different kinds of retrofits will depend on the age of your home and the type of HVAC system, the type of heating or cooling system you already have operating in your home or business today. If we can step forward one slide, thank you. I want to talk about actually where this technology is already working and thriving. And they kind of are operating in, I think about it as like two flavors of network geothermal systems. One project is actually happening just down the road from Somerville in Framingham, Massachusetts. The network is actually owned and being operated by Eversource over the last 9 months or so. And they've had 140 of their residential and commercial customers go through and retrofit their homes and businesses with new HVAC and weatherization upgrades. And the project has actually gone so well that there's an extension loop in design development right now to allow more customers to go in and join the system as well. And that's actually another really great benefit of network geothermal, is that these systems can scale up and larger over time and add more customers and make them increasingly resilient as the systems get larger. Another project that's utilized network geothermal in the past is actually in Austin, Texas, in a neighborhood called Whisper Valley. The system has been installed for a new construction development of about 7,500 residential and commercial buildings across this area in Austin. And to kind of highlight some of the resilience benefits of network geothermal, I want to kind of talk about Superstorm Uri, that major cold snap that hit Texas about 4 years ago. If you remember from the news, these extreme cold temperatures that hit Texas back in 2021 knocked out a lot of the electricity grid and caused the gas infrastructure network in Texas to go down. But despite the extreme cold temperatures affecting the rest of the state, the network geothermal loop in Austin kept running, providing people with heating and hot water despite the frigid temperatures outside their homes and businesses. And I do want to highlight that Somerville, given its older building stock, as you all know here tonight, is more like a Framingham style project in that the retrofits are what are going to make this project more of a challenge than what we saw in Whisper Valley. But we have seen it be successful here in Massachusetts, which is why we're so excited about it here in Somerville. And so essentially, as Garrett alluded to earlier, we are here today to talk about the study that we've been working on with HEAT and the city of Somerville, looking at the feasibility and some initial designs for a potential network geothermal system here in Somerville. We looked at 3 different sites to understand the range of possibilities for what a network geothermal system could look like across the city, varying things like the types of buildings on the network and the types of waste heat resources we could leverage to make the system increasingly more and more efficient. So let's get into it. Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I first want to talk about how we decided where to put a potential demonstration project here in Somerville. Some of you that may have been on a call back in December or January may recognize this slide, but to do the site selection process, we looked at a combination of both technical and planning related factors. We looked at things like the local bedrock geology, the types of buildings that are located in different neighborhoods across the city, looking for a nice even blend of heating and cooling usage. And I'll get to why that's important in a little bit. And we also wanted to look at types of waste heat or thermal resource opportunities that we could utilize to improve the network's efficiency. So things like ice rinks, grocery stores, breweries, data centers, even the Mystic River is a really great thermal resource you can put into a network geothermal system. And from a planning perspective, we wanted to look for things like open space, which is hard to come by, as you all know, here in Somerville. We also wanted to look at some energy equity considerations. So looking at neighborhoods with electricity or gas constraints already today, areas where there may be leaky gas pipes in the ground right now, and then also opportunities to advance energy equity, whether it's with regard to air pollution, energy bills and energy burden, or providing access to active cooling, which some people in this city don't necessarily have, despite the climate getting hotter and hotter every single year. And so Somerville's overall density, as you all know, it's got a very consistent geology and there's tons of waste heat opportunities. Naomi, if you click once, you'll see there's a whole bunch of them scattered all across Somerville. It makes the city actually have a lot of pockets for where network geothermal we think is a viable technology for heating and cooling across the city. And so what we started to do is figure out the types of neighborhoods that could demonstrate the possible range of what a network geothermal system could look like. And we narrowed down on 3 particular sites for our study. 10 Hills up in the north by the Mystic River, Central Hill, where City Hall is, and down on Central Somerville Avenue. And Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I'll kind of talk about why we picked those 3 sites. So for the 10 Hills site, we chose this area primarily due to the proximity of the neighborhood to the Mystic River, and also to look at how to provide network geothermal to a lower income housing community just south of the I-93 freeway. Central Hill we chose as a way to look at how network geothermal could be showcased using municipal and school buildings, so the City Hall, the Public Library, and Somerville High School. And then finally, we looked at Central Somerville Avenue. And along the south side of Somerville Avenue, there's a whole load of resources that could be leveraged for waste heat opportunities. A grocery store, an ice rink, a bunch of light industrial and manufacturing facilities. All of these are really great opportunities to improve the efficiency of a network geothermal system. And if you step forward one slide, I kind of want to talk about the main takeaway we found in our analysis across all 3 sites. Across 10 Hills, Central Hill, and Central Somerville Avenue, we found that the annual balance of heating and cooling loads was the biggest indicator for what would be a technically viable and cost-effective network. And to show why this is important, I want you to look at the plot on the left side of your screen. This essentially is showing how the ground temperature surrounding a borehole changes throughout the year in a balanced network. During the winter heating season, so over the last few months that we've all had here in Somerville, we essentially, if we were on a network geothermal system, we would need to pull heat out of the ground in order to heat our buildings during those cold days of the year. And so because we're pulling heat essentially out of the ground, we would see the temperature of the ground immediately surrounding the borehole drop a few degrees like you see on your screen. Similarly, in the summertime, we want to be able to reject the heat from our buildings and put it back in the ground in order to help cool our buildings back down. And so what we see on that plot is that the temperature of the ground, again, right around the borehole, will start to increase as we're injecting heat, we're storing that heat back into the ground. And then at the end of the year, when it starts to get colder and colder again, we'll pull more heat out of the ground to heat our buildings once again, and we will see the ground temperature drop for the remainder of the year. And so as you can see, if our heating and our cooling loads throughout the year are relatively equal, the ground temperature year by year is relatively stable. However, Somerville is a heating dominant climate. And so because we're dealing with a heating imbalance, like you see in the plot on the right side of your screen, As we pull more and more heat out of the ground faster than we necessarily will give it back, it'll mean that the ground temperature over time will start to deplete itself and get lower and lower and lower. And the reason why this is so important is that as the ground temperature drops, the network and the heat pumps that are plugged into the network become less efficient. And so you don't necessarily get to see those great energy benefits that we would see in a typical balanced network. And Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I want to talk about how this impacts each of the 3 sites. So what you're looking at on your screen are the annual heating and cooling loads for 10 Hills, Central Hill, and Central Somerville Avenue. The red lines on your screen indicate heating loads throughout the year. The blue lines represent the cooling loads throughout the year. And as you can see very quickly, the red lines on your screen are much higher than the blue ones. And if you remember from earlier in my presentation, if you electrify those red lines and they exceed the blue lines, which is essentially how our grid is sized and engineered today to meet electricity demand in Somerville, our grid's going to have some challenges when it comes to electrifying the city. And that's why network geothermal is so important when we talk about electrifying our heating demand in a place like Somerville. And so even accounting for things like climate change and the increasingly hotter summers throughout the year, we will expect there is going to be some level of thermal imbalance in which the heating loads throughout the year exceed the cooling loads. And that's where very careful engineering design of network geothermal becomes so critical. And so what we'll do to still be able to install an efficient network geothermal system is that we'll size the network to meet our cooling load and about 60 to 70% of the heating load throughout the year, leaving the coldest times of the year, so those high red lines you see, especially in January and February of the year, to require some additional heat input to make sure that on the coldest days of the year, you can still meet your heating demand that you need in your home or your business. There's a whole bunch of ways we can go about doing this. Naomi, if you step forward one slide, the way that I like to think about how network geothermal can be accompanied by other heat sources is actually kind of like how our electricity grid currently operates. So here in Massachusetts, some of you may know that we have a base load of electricity that is provided consistently through a blend of natural gas, nuclear, wind, hydro, solar, you name it. Massachusetts probably has some of it. And when we need more electricity at peak demand times of the year, so on those really hot days when everyone's running their AC at full blast, or everyone's getting home from work and needs to charge their EV or cook dinner on their electric stove, we rely on natural gas peaker plants to provide that additional bit of electricity to meet that demand. The same thing can be said for network geothermal. The light blue boxes you see on the chart on the right side of your screen, highlighted in that kind of yellow orangey color, that essentially is the network geothermal providing the base load of heating needed throughout the year. And then the darker blue boxes, where the peak heating loads get higher and higher and higher, especially in the winter times, is what we need to meet with additional heating capacity through an auxiliary heat source. And there's a whole bunch of sources that can be utilized to provide that service. It can come through something like solar thermal, where we leverage the sun to create and store heat for the network. It can come through auxiliary heating systems in your home or your business, which is actually what's being done right now in Framingham. So in Framingham, each home and each business has an additional heating source, whether it is their existing heating system or an electric resistance heating system, to provide just that additional bit of heating capacity on the coldest days of the year. And then finally, why I mentioned it earlier, we can also use waste heat recovery for additional heating capacity. So things like grocery stores, recovering heat from sewer lines, or manufacturing facilities scattered across the city. All of these different things are ways that we can help achieve network balance in even an imbalanced climate like Somerville. And then finally, Naomi, if you step forward one slide, thank you. I want to highlight the costs of the system. So to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of network geothermal, we essentially did a comparative analysis looking at giving every single building in each of the 3 study areas an air source heat pump or allowing each of those buildings to plug into a network geothermal system. And so when you compare the upfront costs of each option, the main cost difference actually lies with the centralized kind of community level networked infrastructure. Again, just like any other utility delivering you gas, water, sewer, all that stuff is community level and it's delivered to your home. At a building level, however, the retrofits required to take on an air source heat pump or to plug into a network geothermal system are quite similar. Regardless of whether or not you have an air source or a water source heat pump in your home, you will still need ducting, you will still need to upgrade your electrical panel, you'll still want to weatherize your home. However, when you look at the utility costs and the operational cost of the system over a longer lifespan of the system, we found that because network geothermal is so much more efficient than an air source heat pump at a building by building level, you'll actually save money over the life cycle of an entire project than you would just giving everyone an air source heat pump. And again, for each of you here today, the most significant cost to all of you is going to be the cost of those building retrofits. And like I mentioned earlier, the costs and the complexity of your retrofitting is going to vary based on how old your home is and the type of HVAC system you currently have operating in your house or your business. And just to kind of showcase some of the funding opportunities to help pay for those retrofits, the chart on the right side of your screen just highlights some of the state and federal level programs available for paying for some of those upfront costs for weatherization, panel upgrades, or a brand new heat pump. And Naomi, if you step forward one slide, I'll wrap up with some kind of key conclusions and next steps. So as you probably learned here today, in looking at each of those three sites, as unique as they all are, the most critical thing for a network geothermal system here in Somerville is that the system design and balancing the amount of heating and cooling on the geothermal network is going to be the most critical factor to determining the technical and economic viability of a system like this here in the city. And like I mentioned earlier, network geothermal, like a gas network, like a sewer network, like a water network, is a major infrastructure project with significant upfront cost. Unlike air source heat pumps, it does need to be done on a collective scale to reap its benefits. But over, many years, the life cycle cost of a network geothermal system is cheaper than giving everyone in the city an air source heat pump. And don't even mention the impacts to the grid and all the savings that we'll get by not having to significantly overhaul the electrical grid here in Somerville. Network geothermal, as Garrett said, is one of the many things that the city of Somerville is investigating to do widespread decarbonization. And if there is one lasting takeaway that I think is the number one important thing, regardless of whether or not there's, whether or not you get an air source heat pump, plug into a network geothermal system or whatnot, the number one thing that you should do today to improve the energy efficiency and think about decarbonizing here in Somerville, weatherize your home, whether it's through new windows, improving the air sealing capabilities of your home, installing new insulation. Weatherizing your house is so critical for helping the city achieve its climate goals. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to, I think, Garrett to pick it up from here.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'll
Yeah.
give you a break. It's no easy thing to introduce a technology and talk about it as a system and project the future and talk about individual homes. So thank you for that. And I do just want to underscore, so network geothermal is, one of many, we in Somerville are taking an all of the above approach to addressing climate change. You'll see in the climate forward agenda, we are pushing forward on many different fronts. And in fact, I did want to, I forgot to say earlier, we will shortly be showing a climate dashboard on our website that will have all the actions in the climate forward agenda and the status of them in the city's efforts and the community's efforts. But as Alex was saying, this is one of many things, and the grid being such a major element of all of our lives, and increasingly so as we need to electrify our power sources, because that is the place where you can have a zero carbon source of energy. We are enhancing the grid. Eversource, you might have seen, is doing projects right now trying to build for the future. And we are also looking at things like network geothermal, which is a resource that, if built, would last many, many decades, just like our other utility resources. But it is no easy thing, as anyone who has lived through a sewer separation project in their neighborhood or driven through it, we all know that these infrastructure projects are no small thing. And so planning and consideration about these projects is really a key element before we make those major community-wide investments. But let's go ahead and move on and just talk about some next steps. And that's the other element we want to leave you with is, this is the future. These are projects that would be conceived and take years to execute and implement. But there are many things you can do right now today to start to decarbonize your home. And we want to invite you to go to somervillema.gov/R2NZ, which stands for Road to Net Zero. And on that site, you're going to see pages and pages of information about how you, an individual, whatever your living situation, renters, property owners, landlords, homeowners, can take steps that are subsidized through Mass Save and other programs to decarbonize. Regardless of whatever heating and cooling system you have in your home, from an old oil boiler and window shaker air conditioners up to the most advanced air source heat pump or geothermal system, improving the envelope of your home. That is to say, putting on that warm sweater that keeps your home warm in the winter and cooler in the summer, and doing that air sealing are things that improve all of those systems. And so we don't want to leave these things for the future and not consider what we can do for our homes right now. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And one of the key things is Shannon Taylor, who's here on our meeting tonight. She is our new energy advisor. She started a few months ago, and her primary role here in the city is to help you, the residents of Somerville, to decarbonize your homes. This is not an easy process. It's complicated, and every home is its own set of challenges and opportunities. And her job is to help folks like yourselves and your friends and neighbors to undergo that process. So we have Shannon's contact information there. Also, if you go to the somervillema.gov/scene, you'll see a sign-up page where you can be contacted by her, as well as her contact information. And you can start to delve into this world of weatherization and decarbonization, which is something that is happening right now. You might have seen in the news about Mass Save, its new 2025 to 27 plan. It is in place. Those incentives are active. And my goal personally, my hope is that everyone on this call, if you haven't already gotten a Mass Save energy audit in the last 3 years, that you go ahead and sign up and do one now. And if you need any help through that process, as I like to say, operators are standing by, ready to help. And let's talk about a couple other steps we want to leave you with before we go ahead and open up to questions. Yep, go ahead. Yeah, so I think, yes, we'll come to the end about some final action steps after this, but I think now is a good time for questions. We can talk about the technology. We can talk about what a network system looks like, talk about Somerville's climate efforts overall. And like we said earlier, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, we can go ahead and get into to questions. And I think I need to click here to see. Yeah, I think Edgar, you're first out of the gate. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. Based on your study, which of the 3 neighborhoods did the best? To my eye, it looked like 10 Hills, where I live. And how far down Shore Drive are you likely to go, or is it just the housing project at the end that you're looking at?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Alex talk about best because I'm not sure exactly how best would be characterized for any particular system. I think, the load balance being a key element of any network, and maybe that is in fact the way to describe best. But one thing I do want to just sort of level set expectations is we looked at these three neighborhoods as somewhat representative examples of different areas of the city. We had to sort of draw a box around what that study would look like. So that map, I don't know if we want to go back to that map real quick, Naomi, if that's possible, would show the sort of limits of that study. But the purpose of that was not to say, oh, the network would have to be built here and it would have to be exactly here. It was really about setting the bounds of that study, right? Looking at a certain number of households in a certain geographic area. I think you just passed it, Naomi. It was the next slide. Yeah. So you'll see it there, the black boxes on both sides of 93. You'll see on the south side is the Somerville Housing Authority and the Somerville Community Corporation properties there that Naomi is circling as I talk. And then we looked at the several blocks that are, I think, along Shore Drive on the north side of 93. But again, this was for the purpose of the study. This wouldn't necessarily have to be what the network would look like, or be exactly this set. But Alex, maybe you can help us with what does best mean when talking about network geothermal?
Yeah, that's a great question, Edgar. I think you're kind of spot on, from our perspective, best part of the kind of best equation is the level of thermal balance that you see from the buildings on the network. Because the more balanced your network is up front, the less kind of additional heat injection you would need to add to the system, which can increase some of the costs associated with, year by year utility costs or any of the capital costs to install a waste heat recovery system or a solar thermal system at some sort of a central plant. I think to really determine the best site, a bit more analysis we think would need to be done on the costing side of things, looking at a full life cycle cost with a bit more detail on the conditions of each building in each neighborhood to start to understand and quantify the level of complexity those building retrofits would require. As we saw in the Framingham project that Eversource is currently operating, the building retrofits were by far the kind of key, I guess, challenge that the utility had to deal with in terms of getting the network up and running. And so finding, a neighborhood that, I guess could minimize the complexity of those retrofits is also a big consideration as part of that best conversation. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, just to
Let me
underscore, just a sec, Jason, just to underscore what Alex said, Somerville, what we have going for us, we're a very dense city. We have a lot of houses or businesses on every block. But what makes it complicated is we're an older city, right? Most of our housing was built before 1950, and a lot of it was built in the late 19th, early 20th century. So retrofits are such a key part of any particular project. And then not to mention the fact that real estate, right? We're limited on real estate for our borehole fields. That is a key part of consideration for any particular project. But Jason, go ahead from Buro Happold.
Edgar, so what will determine best will really come down to the amount of community residents that want to participate in one of these systems. That is really going to define which area is best, because the larger we can make one of these systems, the more efficient it is and the less cost it will be overall. So as Alex mentioned, the next step is to engage the community more to find out how many of the actual community individuals we can include in one of these systems. And these pictures show just a rough outline. These aren't set in stone. What we would like to do is to develop this one or more of these systems to incorporate as many of the individuals in the city as possible. So that's really the best way of looking at these things.
Right. So as Jason said, it is like we've been saying, it's no small thing to build the infrastructure for one of these networks. And so having that network be of use to as many people as possible is really the key consideration for turning one on and being able to operate it efficiently. All right, I think we can probably keep going, but we should probably move on to Jeff. If you want to go ahead with your question.
Yeah, can you go into more details about different models or approaches to the metering that you mentioned? Like, is it BTU differentials over time or something similar to that?
Sure. Alex, I'm going to take a stab at this because I took a couple of classes and then you can tell me where I'm wrong. So there is the basic thermal measurement, right, where you measure the flow of the water in and out of your geothermal heat pump that's in your home, right, and you're measuring that BTU differential, and that would be billed, much in the way that your electric or your natural gas is, right? It's how much thermal energy are you actually using. Another model would be just looking at capacity, right? How many tons, that is to say BTUs of heat or cooling potential are in your home. That has the advantage of having fewer meters, right? You're not measuring as much. You're just looking at what is actually in use in the home or the business, and setting up that billing model. Or there's the subscription, right, where you would have sort of different slices. You've got your residential subscription level, your light commercial subscription level, and your big industrial facility subscription level. All of those have their pluses and minuses in terms of like how difficult they are to actually physically measure and monitor, and all the parts and pieces that are required. And then they also the measure of one of the things about billing thermal or electric energy by use is you're incentivizing people to conserve, right? So there's a balance of incentivizing people to conserve their use of a resource versus all the additional infrastructure that needs to go into place to do that, to monitor use and bill by use. So hopefully I got my classes taught me something, but Alex, you can correct me if I missed anything.
I think your education was good, Garrett.
All right, a couple of classes and a few
Um,
months with you, and I
yeah.
learned something.
The technology that we're talking about here today, it has been deployed across the country, but it is still a relatively new type of system. And utilities are becoming increasingly interested in developing their own networks and figuring out the kind of optimal way to get customers to plug into these systems and also think about how to save them utility costs over the lifespan of them participating in the network. So it's also kind of an ongoing conversation being had for dozens of utilities across the country.
Great. Tori, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Hi. First off, lovely, amazing presentation. I mean, this is why I love living in Somerville. You guys are so smart and on top of it, and just like total thumbs up. My question is regarding the Central Somerville Ave. So I'm sure you guys are aware of the zoning overlay that is before the land use committee right now and the planning board, and
Yes.
there's been lots of conversations about redoing this area. So you mentioned like the light manufacturing and I don't know if you meant the former Ames complex, but all of those buildings from Market Basket to across Dane to Park, like Aeronaut, Greentown, and so that whole area is being designated for a zoning overlay. So my question is, have you been in touch with the Office of Strategic Planning? And is it will that zoning be and that development be able to take advantage of the geothermal? How are those conversations going? And that's my question.
Yeah, thanks, Tori, for the question. Yeah, that is a complicated interaction, right, between the world as it is and the modeling that you would do today based upon the buildings and their uses as they exist now, and then the perspective of a potential zoning change. Yes, we spent a lot of time with planning and zoning, and Sarah Lewis, who you might be familiar with from that effort, in fact, was involved in this study and participated in the meetings. So we did make a decision to use this as a prospective example for an area that has a mixed commercial and residential uses as a way of sort of capturing that study. Future zoning changes and future build outs, and that potentiality couldn't really be something that we integrated into the study for this network sizing exercise. But it's we understand that obviously that load profile would change as buildings came into the future. So I guess to sort of sum up the answer, certainly aware of that planning exercise that's underway, but we didn't want to preclude studying an area like this because of those potential changes happening. One particular reason I just want to say, the reason we looked at this too is there's that ice rink, which is a powerful waste heat resource in any network. So we did kind of want to, no matter what, draw a box around that area and take a look at this study. So
thank you so much. Just quick follow-up. And
yeah.
Again, thank you. Amazing. Is there a way to continue to still allow this area to be a candidate for geothermal and to work with, let's say, buildings that get built one building at a time? Is there a way to develop relationship and to continue to have this as a viable site as construction moves forward? And thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, we're certainly continuing to look at all parts of the city. And I do just want to underscore again, these three areas were slices of the city, different parts of the city that have their own sort of unique characteristics, but also that are not unlike many other parts of Somerville, right? Any random block of Somerville that you draw a box around has a lot of the same houses and a lot of the same kind of building typology. So we needed to take areas to study, right? So we could create bounds of what that physics and economic analysis would look like. But these aren't necessarily, these do not have to be the only areas that we would look at for a future project or necessarily be in exactly these shapes. So I guess that is to say, don't take this as the end of the conversation. Take this as the beginning of the conversation about this technology and its potentiality here in Somerville. Like I said, again, we're a dense city. We got a lot of users, so we're a good candidate. But then we have the challenges of open space, predominantly heating load, and all the other things that Alex talked about. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you again for the presentation. It's really excellent. As a longtime collaborator with both Buro Happold and Brightcore, you got some great minds there to help guide this process. Mine is really about kind of readiness, regardless of best case scenarios in terms of the study areas. I've talked in community gatherings as well as with some counselors and executive folks about the kind of retrofit readiness that will help inform eventual deployment of such a system. Is the city planning or has done, or in whatever form it might be, to do a kind of survey or an audit determining what the retrofit readiness inventory is?
Could you expand on that? Do you mean in regards to the particular HVAC systems that are in individual houses? Is that?
Because I think even for electrification conversations, one of the concerns that tends to be is from unit to unit, house to house, is everyone feels fairly alone in the process of determining what their costs will be individually versus what might be a deployable kind of group buy. And while this is one facet of that kind of systems changing, this, that audit would be very useful information, I think, for both the city and for this particular study, I think, in determining plug-in.
Right, and there are a couple different levels to that. There's the street level electrical capacity, right? And any individual going from, let's say, 100 amps to 150 amps of service to be able to use an electric heating device, an electric stove, and the like. So we are on that front. We will be publishing a study shortly regarding neighborhood electrification challenges and that user experience for a household that wants to electrify. We also are looking at sort of citywide capacity, electrical capacity challenges. This is one of those studies to that, addressing that constraint. And we're doing outreach on weatherization in particular, with the notion that we don't want people to wait and not insulate and air seal their homes, waiting for some future technology. But one of the things, as you mentioned, one of the things we will have to figure out is the complexity of individual homes and what their existing systems are and how ready any one home would be to plug into the system. And I think citywide surveys would be one model. Another model would be as we dial into particular neighborhoods for structural reasons, then we would be able to do more focused surveys for individual users and their potentiality for connecting to a system. Does that answer your question? I tried to come at it from
I think so.
ways.
I think what it came from the idea of I think it was Heat Smart, Cool Smart program, as well as the solar program. The trifecta was now the weatherization and air sealing program. And if that was something that citizens could tap into and determine that they could get a lower rate to do those kinds of improvements. Those two previous programs were some time ago and probably worth another look.
Yes, and with the new resource of Shannon as the energy advisor, we're going to be, and we are doing a lot more individualized outreach to households within neighbors. We're particularly targeting renter households, because it's such a large portion of Somerville's population and has some of the lowest uptake of decarbonization and weatherization measures. So we'll be doing a variety of different outreach, direct and community events. Because at the end of the day, for everyone on this call and everyone you talk to, there's no reason not to weatherize in your home right now. And for a lot of folks, decarbonizing makes sense as well. So we don't want people to not do that today.
And there's some advancements with occupied unit air sealing that is less of a problem than it has been traditionally.
Indeed, there's some new technologies that are coming online to help. Okay, Lindsay.
Yes, I'm Lindsay Luke and live in Winter Hill, and my house is actually completely weatherized, and I have solar panels on the roof. I am curious about how solar panels with the electricity they generate behind the meter fit into the picture. Seems to me like that would be a very wise thing in terms of reducing the need for peak, facilities generated centrally.
Oh yeah, no, putting solar on an electrified home is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. I've got solar on my house too. It helps. It's a thing that helps in all seasons. Whatever your heating and cooling system is, solar produces electricity and helps offset that load. Alex is nodding. Anything particular to say about geothermal and solar? But no, solar is always great. And
Is
for whatever
that something,
whatever you're doing.
is that something the city can encourage more?
We can always encourage more for everything. I would love for everybody to do
Right,
everything
right.
tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and in fact, you know, our outreach on weatherization includes solar and renewable energy as one of those as one of the options that we're going to be talking with building owners about. And also, I will just take one more second to plug our community choice aggregation. We have the 100% clean green option. So if you are not in a position where you can put solar on your roof, but you want to be 100% renewables, there's an opt-up function to the 100% clean green. So go to cce.somervillema.gov and see some of the options that are available to you. So we all can go 100% green. Jeff.
Yeah, me again. Would you mind going into a little bit about the risks and resiliency of these systems? Like, it seems like there's a bit of a risk to the larger, and like the larger you go, the more impact of a problem with one of these loops could be, and like whether there are like techniques to avoid single point of failures or shutting off zones or that sort of thing in case of like leaks or God forbid an earthquake, that sort of thing. Like I could see these being pretty big problems.
Yeah. Alex, maybe you can talk about some of the resiliency functions we saw in Texas and in general how these systems work.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. You know, typically what we find, yes, while, you know, a larger network, more pipe in the ground, more boreholes, more buildings create more potential risks of something failing along the course of the network. There are ways to monitor and meter and quickly identify problems if they do arise. It's exactly what's happening right now in Framingham. While it is a demonstration study and there are a lot of flow meters and BTU meters kind of making sure that everything is operating a-okay throughout the course of the network, you know, there are measures we can put in place to, I guess, quickly understand and mitigate failures that do happen. From a resilience perspective, as the network gets larger and larger, you actually do start to see almost resilience benefits from a thermal perspective. By having more heating and cooling loads throughout the course of a network, you're actually able to more easily balance the system. So a lot of the challenges that I alluded to earlier about there being such a high heating dominance relative to cooling on the network, as the network gets bigger and bigger, and as you add more cooling dominant buildings, which are primarily commercial buildings to the system. From a resilience perspective, you're able to share a lot more heating and cooling throughout the year to actually improve performance. Yeah, Jason, do you want to add anything else to kind of some of the key risks? I know from an environmental perspective, we're learning more and more every day about the impacts of these systems. Yeah.
No, you did a great job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I'd also just add, from Brightcore's perspective, these systems are specifically closed loop. You might hear about different types of geothermal systems. Specifically, closed loop systems are exactly like they sound. They're a closed loop. So as long as they are installed correctly, they can last up to 100 years. It's pretty elegant technology. You have water, maybe a little bit of glycol circulating through, and as long as they're done right, really require minimal maintenance. And I would also add Rob, my colleague Rob knows very well that there are also sensors that we can put on these systems, and we have monitoring platforms that we can use that you know exactly what entering and exiting temperatures you're looking at and exactly how the system is working. Rob, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I can just expound upon that point that, yeah, typically when these systems are installed, there's some sort of control system, some type of control system installed alongside it that would monitor, yeah, like Clara said, entering, leaving temperatures, flow rates through the system, and that data can be leveraged to determine if there's an issue, catch it before it happens, ideally, or right as it's happening, and can act on it quickly.
Yeah, so I'll sum up. I don't want to sound like a salesman for network geothermal, but I guess I will say, you know, at the end of the day, it's a very fancy technology, but at its core, it's pushing water through pipes underground, which is something we've been doing now for a pretty long time. I think we've generally gotten pretty good at distributing water around city. At least my tap works most of the time. So I think you know that all things can break, but this is has some advantages of being buried underground and being water in pipes. So that has some great resilience advantages. All right, so I do see some folks are dropping off, and I don't see any raised hands. So before we lose everyone, I did want to just leave you with a couple of takeaways at the very end. A couple of things you can do. Nothing else. Make sure you get that Mass Save Energy Audit. It's free, and we have Shannon who can help you navigate that process. We also would hope folks can go and sign up for our Sustainaville newsletter, where we'll be sending out more information about this report and all the other things that we're doing every month. And we also have a lot of cool events. So we hope you sign up for that. Do please weatherize your home. Tell your neighbors to weatherize their home. You know, the most efficient piece of energy is the one you don't use, and the way you do that is you put a sweater on your home and you keep the cold drafts out. And so weatherization always is a good thing. And then last thing is, you know, we'd love for folks to stay engaged with this larger development of this policy at the state level. And one of the ways to do that is to go to heat.org, learn more about the gas to geo transition project, and register your interest. So thank you all for coming this evening. We will be posting this webinar and the report on the Somerville website. If you go to somervillema.gov/geothermal, you can see this recording and see our written materials. And then last thing before you go, I'll just leave you on the next slide with our contact information, and just say thank you all for coming this evening. So we did finish a couple minutes early, but thank you all.